Have you ever believed that physical harm was just a discipline? What if what you call discipline is causing trauma? Did God really mean discipline to physically hurt? What does the Bible say regarding healthy discipline? So, our episode for today is healthy discipline versus physical abuse. Hi, beloved. This is Doc Gilbert, and I'm a Christian clinical counselor and psychologist. Hi, guys. Kamusta kayo? It's been a while. So, happy summer to all of you here in the Philippines. The temperature has been very hot, even here. I mean, from January where there's a lot of coldness, but then when February came and now we are in March, it's so hard to go outside because the sun's heat is so high and it's so uncomfortable. And well, thankfully, I don't need to go outside due to my work from home setup. I do like my counseling and therapy here at home, online counseling. Um, well, I do need to go outside sometimes, for errands. But yeah, I mean, it's really been hot, and yeah, I hope you guys, you stay hydrated, stay away from the peak of the sun, and yeah, I mean, just keep safe, because heat stroke is also possible. And yeah, well, anyway, for those of you who want to have their own counseling or therapy, you can message the Facebook page, the description. The link of that page is in our description. You can message the Intimacy Philippines to set an appointment. Discussions like this, YouTube, podcast, TikTok, or Reels are not therapy. No, we cannot substitute that with therapy. And yeah, you can message, and you're gonna have an appointment with me, as the admin would help you to how will how would that be, okay? Well, we're gonna talk about something very controversial here in the Philippines, which is the physical abuse versus healthy discipline. Of course, like in my years of counseling, I've heard a lot of people, uh, men and women, whatever their backgrounds are, went through their own physical abuse experience. Of course, like when we talk about the physical abuse, we're gonna, detail that later. It has its own degree, severity, and for some, they experience slapping, punching. For some, kurot or like pinching of the skin. For some, like the use of objects hitting them physically. So, anything that brought physical hurt or harm or pain to the body of a child is a form of physical abuse. And many from them, before entering in counseling, saw that as, a normal experience. And, they just say, that's what my mothers or the typical mothers or fathers do. They use like belt or slippers or hanger to discipline us. And many from them believe that it's a form of healthy discipline in which, it created this, uh, masochistic effect, from these people, that whatever like abuse, harm, or hurt that they've experienced as an adult, they would see it as something they deserve it because it's their fault, you know, and the shame is being reinforced inside them. Shame that says you must be bad in order to be punished. You must be evil. You must not be good. You deserve that. You're not worthy of love. And aside from that, love is mixed up with abuse. Many adults believe that, being physically hurt means you are being loved by your parent. It is a testament that they do care, that they do love, that they do value you, even at the expense of being, physically hurt, experiencing, uh, pain, muscles pain, pasa, whatever like physical pain that you can endure, or body ache. So yeah, I mean, you know, um, and in the therapy, I needed to like break that from in within them. I needed to like one by one gently inform them and bring the truth to them that it's actually a physical abuse. Okay, so yeah, later we're gonna identify what's the difference, but you know um it created also an impact towards relationship with God. Again, our attachment styles and experiences growing up became our lenses on how we see God. So many from these people, when they sinned against God, quote unquote, um they believe that God is angry. Of course, like God is angry many times due to the sin and unrepentant hearts of the people. We know that. But like this view of God as an angry God, as a punitive God, like God would like scream at you, shout at you, or physically hurt you, or like the struggles, the suffering are proof of punishments from God, and even like being abandoned, so and yeah, I mean that makes sense because the parents are the reflection supposed to be of God here on earth, for us as a child, but due to that physical abuse, it distorted even the view of God. And many times, I hear that among Christian counselees who grew up in a home that has domestic violence, physical violence, or any form of physical abuse, that they berate themselves, they are hard on themselves, they attack themselves verbally, and even like for some, like develop like self-harming behaviors and even suicidal ideations and tendencies, and even not just that, like developing different addictions, unhealthy copings, toxic ways to deal with stress, which is a form of harming oneself, which is also a reenactment of that abuse. Like when we talk about abuse, it's harming oneself physically. And with this unhealthy and toxic coping, it's harming oneself as well. So, and of course, like many from these people who has anxiety, depression, anger outbursts, issues, relationship problems, spiritual struggle, and like different like mental, emotional, relational problems, and many from them experience domestic abuse, the physical abuse inside the home, whether from their fathers or mothers, and yeah, so part of the trauma work of letting them experience healing is to first unveil the painful truth that the one who's supposed to love them abused them physically. At the physical hurt and pain that they've experienced are forms of abuse, and it's not discipline, it's not a healthy form of correction. It's out of anger, it's out of the unresolved trauma of these parents and these adults, which are being transferred and experienced by the children. Like you became the recipient of the abuse that they have not yet healed. The abuse that is being re-experienced through the triggers of these parents or adults. Okay, so yeah, I mean, we need to not normalize that, hurting the physical body as a discipline. It is not discipline, it is physical abuse. Okay, so we need to call it for what it is really is. That's also a huge part of healing. Okay, so I really advocate that to teach parents who are open to it, not those who are narcissistic. Of course, they're not open to it. They use shaming and even like the physical abuse, which is a huge part of the malignant narcissist personality style. They are not willing to listen or to learn. But for those, I really advocate learning healthy discipline in parenting their children, and even more than that, as a parent, you grow in your self awareness, you heal your own trauma, and you go through the process of understanding yourself. Okay? So there is no better gift that you can give to your child than your own healing, than your own self awareness, because whatever we learn or information and knowledge that we add up to our brain, if there would be triggers, it would bring up the unhealed wounds in us, and we would replay that kind of pattern and dynamic in to our children, to the people that you are leading, as an adult, wherever you are in the sphere of this leadership or community. So, and also as a survivor of physical and domestic abuse, um it's very important that these people, who are abusing, should receive the rightful consequence and accountability. So many from these abusers do not experience accountability. And with the poor justice system here in the Philippines, we don't expect that, every victim of physical abuse would receive the justice that they deserve. Many from these policemen, and with the connections and even like the minimization, of course, like they would minimize something that they do not see as a problem growing up, and there are huge numbers of physical abuse victims and survivors even here in the Philippines. So how could these authorities see that as a form of abuse, even if it's not life and death, but there is really physical hurt and there is pattern? How could they see that if you know their own experience of physical abuse is not resolved, is not healed, that they are not aware about that? So I'm not really like hopeful with the justice system here, although like I believe if God desires to bring a certain justice for his purpose, it would happen. But that's one of the things that I grieve here, the justice that I hope and ideally want to happen would not happen here on earth. So to be frank, like the justice system here is not good. We cannot rely on that. And like I have like counselees who went through the process of the interrogation, the investigation, and it led for her to be traumatized. So it's not worth it in a way, especially if the victim is, just experienced trauma and it's just fresh. So, and then you have to go through the untrained, non empathic interrogation, and it would not be worth it. Okay? And I remember with my own experience, we were like physically abused and I ran away from home, and I went to the barangay, and of course the barangay like went to our house together with me. They accompanied me, but when the authorities saw that it was my father, so because they've had connection, they are friends in basically, so they let go of him. With the malignant narcissist, they build a lot of connections in the community, to solidify their authority, their control, their influence. And that's one of the basic examples of that. And yeah, I processed that in my own counseling and therapy for many years in the past. And, I needed to release the anger, grieve the laws of justice and safety, of being protected by these people, you know, and that is happening even as I speak today. So yes, I believe in the justice of God. Yes, I believe in speaking out and standing up for the truth, fighting for the right, for those who cannot fight for themselves, and have that space, have that position, but also at the same time being realistic that sometimes, most of the times, in our justice system here in the Philippines, justice is only served to the rich people. And if you're poor, you don't have connections, you don't have money, then there would be no justice for you. So yeah, I mean, the physical abuse also is minimized, is neglected, denied, invalidated, due to the poor system here in the Philippines, poor justice system. And of course, I can connect that with the narcissistic system, meaning those people who are narcissists, who have power, money, possessions. They use their power, their authorities, for their own selfish ambitions and gains, and harm, reject, neglect the people that they don't serve, that don't serve their purpose. Okay, so that's the harsh reality here in the Philippines. So, what is the difference between physical abuse versus healthy discipline? Okay, so we need to understand the motivation here, because the motivation is the foundation of understanding a specific behavior, action, or overall reaction and processes. Okay, with healthy discipline, it aims to teach, correct, and guide behavior while preserving dignity and safety. Okay, and most of the time it does not use physical harm or physical hurting someone. Okay, and if it is like necessary, like with with the severity of the sin or the mistake or the fault, it's better to use an object, like for example sleeper, and just hit it one, but there is an explanation of why it should happen. Okay? So the physical hurt served to be the consequence, but it's not like a pattern where you're gonna hit the person, the child, multiple times. But still, the discipline should require a specific consequence, like removing, specific privileges, opportunities, or like anything that is important but not the basic needs like money, food, place to live in, but any like privileges. Okay, but with the physical abuse, it uses pain, fear, or force to control, to dominate, or release anger. So basically, the physical abuse is a form of aggression, of a release of an anger that outbursts, from this person. And yes, for some it's verbal attacks, for some it's shaming, but for this, the way the parent or the adult or the person uses uh, to cope, to release his or her anger, is by physically hurting someone. So we have to remember that discipline should be measured, purposeful, and corrective. Because abuse is all about reaction, excessive emotion of anger, and harmful. And we have to remember that if correction leaves a child feeling unsafe, humiliated, or threatened, it has crossed into the abuse. And with the physical abuse, there is, a crossing of physical boundary, because our body meant to nurture, to bless, to take care, to be an extension of love, empathy, and compassion, with like giving healthy hug, healthy touches. But when it the body is used, or an object is used to hurt the physical body, then it crosses into the abuse already. Okay? So, yeah, I mean, so what is the biblical standpoint with regards to the physical abuse versus healthy discipline? Okay? So the biblical discipline, we should know that it should flow from love, instruction, and relationship, not violence. And we can read that in Proverbs 3:12 and Ephesians 6:4. Okay? And I'm going to give like some of the verses here. So in Proverbs 3:12, because the Lord disciplines those he loves, as a father the son he delights in. Okay? So we can see here that the emotion that is accompanied by the word discipline is not anger, it's not aggression, but it's delight. Discipline is an evidence of the love of the parent, for the child, because discipline corrects wrongful behavior. Discipline hopes to correct sinful pattern in order for the child to grow, in a way that is healthy, secure, safe, who has an identity. So, yeah, it's really interesting here when it is used uh, in the discipline, and then the emotion is the lie. Okay? So, in Ephesians 6:4, fathers, do not provoke your children to anger, but bring them up in the discipline and instruction of the Lord. So even in the use of the verses, it's commonly used by narcissistic and toxic people, when they say you have to honor your father and mother, but not explaining the whole context of the verse. And this is the misplaced or misuse, or a neglected part where the parents are instructed by God to not provoke the children to anger. Okay? So when we say provoke, means to trigger them to use their vulnerability, their wounds, their weaknesses, and it could be like attacking them through words, attacking them physically, and I remember this counseling where he was continuously provoked by his adoptive mother, being attacked verbally, you know, every day. There's no day that he would not hear her like attack him. Okay, so there is provocation, and even the scripture calls the parents to train and nurture, not provoke fear or resentment. So with the physical abuse, it's of course could trigger. It is triggering the amygdala, the threat center of the brain, towards being activated, and one of the response of amygdala is freeze mode, where the victims feel fear. They are terrified. They feel unsafe. So most of the time, these people like became frozen, developed depression, developed like anxiety disorders, experience suicidal ideation, hypervigilance, and so forth and so on. So because the physical abuse is instilling fear, not love, not empathy, not compassion. And it's so funny because even in politics, there is like a politician where this person uses force to hurt physically someone, and this person was hailed as someone courageous and brave, and something to be followed on. This person is a model. But well, these people who supported that kind of violence, no wonder that they grew up in a domestically violent home. Okay? So Jesus modeled correction through truth, compassion, and presence, and never intimidation. There's nothing in the scripture that Jesus used physical violence. I remember when he was being arrested by the guards, and you know I don't remember if it is Peter. Please correct me. You know, this disciple used the sword to attack a soldier, where this soldier's ear was decapitated. And then Jesus said, he stopped him and healed the soldier's ear. And even like when he said, it's so amazing when he said that he why did you like bring a lot of people, like a lot of soldiers? If I ask my Father in heaven to bring legions of angels, but it would happen. Okay, so I'm just not using the exact word. You can search it up. But it's amazing that Jesus did not use violence. And even, those people who believed in him and, see that Jesus would overthrow the Roman Empire through the use of physical force. But that's not what Jesus did. He rode in a donkey. Okay? He did not ride a horse with swords and spears. Although, like, in one word, he could banish all these people. But, with this act, it showed the humility of our Lord Jesus Christ. So he never uses violence. He did correct, he did confronted religious people, but he did not use violence per se. So the Bible never justifies harm that distorts a child's view of God as loving and safe. And I remember this counseling, that, because of the physical abuse that he experienced for many years, he sees God as someone who would punish him because of his sin, who would abandon him because of his sin. And I remember he said, God would God will bring me to hell, because of a lot of shame and guilt that he carries inside, struggling, for many years in this struggle, with addiction, with uh the dystonia, this depression, this all this like suffering. you know he saw God as someone who would punish him. And later on, in doing the trauma work, that he began to see that that's not who God is. you know but it's understandable that we see God based on how we experience our earlier attachment as a child, from our fathers and mothers. So if your mother or father is an absent parent or abandoned you, then you see God as well as someone who would abandon you during times of triggers, stress, or failures. Okay? So we can see that in the Bible. That's very clear. That physical abuse is not, encouraged. It's not healthy. So let's look at the psychological perspective. So in healthy discipline, it should support healthy emotional regulation. So when we talk about emotional regulation, it's our ability to manage our difficult emotions, cope healthily, suit ourselves at times of stress or triggers or like painful experiences. It's not going to the addiction or unhealthy pattern of coping or toxic ways to suit ourselves. So healthy discipline enables emotional regulation. And for many people who are experiencing mental health, problems or disorders, it's also an issue of emotional regulation because their amygdala gets overly activated, their nervous system are in hypervigilance or hypovigilance state. The organs are all inflamed due to the trauma of physical abuse. So thus, and even there's no modeling of emotional regulation, which should come from the parents. Okay, so the parents' emotional regulation help the child to regulate their emotions because a child, does not have capacity yet to emotionally regulate, himself or herself. Okay, so healthy discipline also supports secure attachment. So when we say secure attachment, just like what I've discussed in the earlier episodes, so it's about feeling safe, feeling secure towards our parents. And even though we make mistakes, we know that we are loved, we are not punished, we are worthy and valuable. And then our feelings are heard, we are seen, we experience empathy, and we're able to connect in a genuine and safe manner towards a parent. Okay? And also moral development. And many from the antisocial tendencies, when I say antisocial tendency, this lack of remorse when, a wrong behavior is being done, a sinful behavior is being done, like hurting others, specifically lying, manipulating, attacking, aggression. There's lack of remorse, lack of empathy, and most of this are rooted from the trauma of being physically abused. Okay? So the moral development, meaning the ability to see what is right from wrong, is not developed because um, how can you see the right and wrong if the parent who's supposed to love you abuse you physically, attack you physically? It's really ambivalent. You love the parent, you also hate them, but also it's very confusing. How come this is love that I'm being physically hurt? How come that this is love when I'm feeling all this kind of pain and suffering? Okay? So, yeah, I mean, that's the impact of that. And yes, that's the healthy discipline. But physical abuse increases risk of anxiety, trauma, aggression, shame, and relational difficulties. So, yeah, time and time again, that's really true. And the adverse childhood experiences, it shows that these mental disorders that are also connected with the physical health problems are rooted from trauma, and one of that is physical abuse. And I remember this studies by Dr. Laser, one of the pioneer therapists who started the work of sexual addiction. So it shows that, like, a lot of percentage of those who are sexually addicts came from physically abusive home. Okay? So, we have to remember that fear-based correction teaches compliance. Okay? Out of fear, out of anxiety, you know, out of obligation, out of not wanting to be hurt, you know, but it's not teaching character development or self-control, you know. So children internalize discipline best when correction is paired with emotional safety and consistency. So, when you uh, communicate and give the rightful consequence to a specific wrong behavior, you need to connect to the child. What are the feelings? What are the thoughts? And even like uh, this like engage the prefrontal cortex towards, you know, what do you call that? Critical thinking. What would you feel? What would you think? What would be the impact of this behavior towards others? What would be the impact of that in your life? And engaging with that and coupling it with empathy and validation, it makes the child, feel safe. And in that way, you are actually teaching emotional regulation, critical thinking, which is very important in the development of our prefrontal cortex, the executive functioning of our brain. So, and in that way, they grow as a healthy and self-aware, mature, adult in the future. Okay? So, in conclusion, how do you heal from this physical abuse? And many from my counselees in the early part of our journey together, it's really hard to admit that their parents, their fathers or mothers, have hurt them physically, have caused harm, and did abuse to them. because of the symbiosis, this natural love that we have for our parents. And along the way in the process, I hope that you'll have your own therapy. uh these people learned how to acknowledge that what happened to them is not right. It is an abuse, and it is harmful, it is toxic, and it is traumatizing. So, yeah, so healing begins by naming what happened to you truthfully, without spiritual minimization, spiritualization, which is very common among Christians, and how they like spiritualize that they have forgiven their parents, that they want to honor their parents. So I always like lead them to reality, and through engaging with this thought pattern that talking about what happened to them and the harm and the hurt that they've experienced is not equated to disrespecting or dishonoring their parents. They simply acknowledge the reality of what happened. And yeah, I mean, that's a lot of healing already, for the people, for the survivors of physical abuse to finally acknowledge the physical abuse that they've endured, that they've experienced. And and that's why it's very important to integrate trauma informed way of ministry, or counseling, or pastoring, or discipleship, because we need to understand that it's something that cannot be healed by spiritualizing everything, reciting Bible verses, praying, although those are important things, those are important coping, but it has to be dealt with. There must be a healing process that you can go through, you must go through. Okay? So we have to understand that God's design for discipline ultimately leads to healing, wisdom, and restored identity, not lasting wounds, not traumatic experience. Okay? And I hope that if you watch this, I know it's not an accident. I hope that you begin your own healing process, that you find the right counselor or psychologist that can journey with you. Okay? So that's it, beloved. And if you've learned something, please do comment down below, your insights, reflections, awareness. I would love to hear that. And if you know someone who might benefit from this, please do share the link of the video. And if you are new here, welcome to our YouTube channel. So please subscribe. And by subscribing, you are actually helping the Ministry of Intimacy Philippines in bringing more healing to many people. Okay? So hope to see you in our next episode. Hanggang sa muli.